Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Perkins. I'm the CMO of QA Symphony. I want to welcome you to our webinar today, Agile Transformation, People, Process, and Tools to Make Your Transformation Successful. We have two great speakers with us today. This should be a great session. A couple items before we get started. First, I think I put it in the main slide. This webinar, the audio is delivered through your computer. So there's no dial-in number. Just make sure you turn up your computer speakers or you use a pair of headsets. That will get you going with the audio. If your audio is choppy, it could be because of your internet connection. Now, the presenters are all talking through phones, so our audio should be fine. So usually if the audio isn't working, it's on your end, so we'd recommend you either maybe getting closer to your wireless router or looking for a different internet signal or hardwiring your computer into your network internet. Hey everybody, I'm sorry about that. Our audio just dropped out for a minute. So we're back, sorry. I'll just pick up where I left off. You are able in this webinar to customize your viewing experience by increasing or decreasing the size of the widget. So if you want to make that presentation a little bit bigger, if you have a bigger monitor, you should be able to do that. And so that should be easy. And a few other items. The webinar will be available on demand. The webinar will be available on demand starting after we wrapped up. So just look for it. You will get an email. If you want to join the conversation on Twitter, we will be live tweeting. So just use the hashtag Agile Transformation. Again, we will be taking Q&A during this webinar. And at the end of the webinar, please stick around and take a brief survey that we have. Just helps us kind of gauge the success of the webinar and get feedback for future webinars. So we appreciate you doing that. This webinar is brought to you today by QA Symphony. For those of you who are not familiar with QA Symphony, we are the makers of a test management tool that's built for agile teams. And we're also excited today to have with us our partners from ClearVision. ClearVision are world-leading software experts. And they are Atlassian premium partners. So we're very excited that ClearVision can be on the webinar today to join us. I also want to bring to your attention a couple other things. We have a lot of resources available. We encourage you to check out our website, QASymphony.com. Where you can get a range of webinars and ebooks and blogs. A lot of things that'll kind of help you as a software developer or a software tester. And then next week, for those of you who may be attending Star East next week, we will be there. Star East is in Orlando, and promises to be a great event. So definitely check out Star East, and if you are there, we're going to be at booth number 18. So come see us at booth 18, and we would love to see you there. And if you do want to set a meeting or set an appointment with us at Star East, in the resources widget on the screen, you'll see a link to a Calendly, and you can just go in there and set an appointment with us and just swing by the booth whenever you're ready for your appointment. So lastly, I want to just quickly introduce our presenters, and then we're going to do a quick poll for the audience. Our presenters today are Andrew Strickland, who's the head of client service at ClearVision, and Kevin Dunn, who's the VP of strategy and business development for QA Symphony. So welcome, guys. Andrew, you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, everybody.
Okay, and Kevin?
Yeah, hey,
Thank you for joining. All right, so I'm going to start now with a poll. And the poll question is, what percentage of your company's development team is currently agile? So if you could take a quick second and answer this poll, that would be great. All right, so give you a couple seconds to take the poll, and then we're going to go through. So interesting distribution here. It looks like some of you are saying your teams you're agile across your organization, some less than 25%. So pretty interesting stats there. Then we'll go to one more poll, and so if you are in an agile transformation process, help us understand where you are in that process. You haven't started yet, you're just starting, you're maybe midway through, you've recently completed your agile transformation, or you've been fully agile for a while. So let us know there, just so we could gauge kind of where you are in that process. All right, give it about 5 more seconds. And all right, I'm going to go to the next slide to take a look at the results. Okay, so this is interesting. So I think this is a good segue into to you, Andrew. It looks like our audience here, you have a fair amount of people who either haven't started or just starting or are midway through, which is probably why they're on the webinar today. But Andrew, why don't you take it away from there?
Excellent, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as you say, quite an interesting spread on the first poll question, pretty much evenly across the board. And this one, yeah, obviously, you'd expect most of the attendees to be starting or partway through. Interesting to see those fully agile for every year, and be interesting to get their feedback on some of the information, obviously, that we're putting into this, and how Agile transformed is the organization. So I'd like to start a little bit of history. I've been in software development for a long time now, probably too long. But I've always felt that waterfall could work with a few caveats. But doing it right means actually, sorry, we seem to have jumped a slide. 1 second. Okay, sorry, we seem to have slide out of wrong order, I'm afraid. So, yeah, should be starting here with conceptually, you should essentially design and build software like you build cars. Fully scoped requirements, detailed engineering designs, you build all the specification, do it right, and it obviously could work. But of course, you see my next slide, just very briefly. The main problem with that is every copy of a piece of software costs thousands. Main investment with getting it done, getting it all defined up right, is that it's a hugely costly exercise. And of course, one of the main things you get there, you're not meeting the social expectation that software changes rapidly. And from my experience throughout the last 30-odd years, it's rarely been done right. It's rarely been a system that's ever been designed properly up front, even ignoring the question of, goals changing during development, requirements changing through development. I don't think I've ever seen a system that's properly been spec'd and scoped against the user base, which is the main problem we have. So we had a need for something better, and a lot of things have been tried. Computer-aided software engineering was an interesting one. Stop developers doing any coding, allow them to specify things in detail, and then the computer writes all the software for you. Rapid application development, some people do think it's an early evolution of Agile, etc. And something I grew up with was just structured systems analysis and design methodologies, which was rather waterfall like, but also involved the end user community a lot more, which a lot of waterfall initial systems did not. So over the last years, we've started to settle on Agile. Quick feedback, fail fast, visibility, etc. Risk management, flexibility, and so on. So I think everyone in this audience should be fairly familiar with Agile. And I'm always keen to emphasize with everybody, whether they're familiar with it or not, that Agile is a philosophy. It's a mindset. It's not a set of processes. It's not a standard set of working operations that can be applied. And if you're going to transform into Agile, then it's not as simple as just putting in a few software teams. What needs to transform essentially, and it's people being one of the main things, and that's at all levels. Testers, release or development teams, operations, stakeholders, managers, directors, the end users. Everyone needs to evolve to enable Agile transformation to properly happen within an organization. If it doesn't, if you don't do the training, if you don't do the culture change, then there are huge barriers to it getting anywhere, and in fact making Agile at all effective. So, what do Agile fail? One of the primary problems with Agile transformation is a lot of people just think, oh, we'll implement Scrum, Kanban, XP, whatever it might be, into the development team, and we Agile. But essentially, what have you really achieved? And I'm very strong in saying pretty much nothing. You get some internal visibility, you get some quick churn, you get your teams working quite effectively to deliver features, but they rarely get to the customers because of the rest of the barriers within the organization towards getting your full Agile transformation in place. And it's your customers that are important. And if they don't get the new features, why bother with developing anything or even pretending to go Agile in any way, shape or form? So, what are Agile fail? What are Scrum fail? I've had some fairly interesting names sitting behind it, but essentially it means that the organization hasn't transformed, and we're still trying to plan everything in large software implementations with slow release cycles, etc. And if you're going into Agile without delivery, then you are it's becoming rather pointless. So just conceptually, dev team maybe produces 5 user features every 2 weeks. This is a normal sprint run, for example. But I've seen many organizations where the release cycles, because the barriers put in by the organization about saying, how release has to happen with the organization, and the fact we've got to do lots of testing, etc., and it's all very monolithic, very structured, very intrusive, then commonly you can end up with quarterly release cycles still being put in place. So that's 30 user features that aren't getting delivered except once per quarter. Huge roadblock, huge barrier to progress, etc. And that's often down to 2 things. That's commonly down to people and a belief across the organization because of lack of culture change that Agile and coming into DevOps, and that's very much coming into the fold now, rapid deployment, continuous delivery, whatever it might be, is scary. It's risky, and what we're needing to do is to looking at the mitigation of those types of risks in order to facilitate good practice, good Agile delivery methodologies. And tooling is the other considerable barrier. If you're utilizing things such as HP's Quality Center and that's significant tool stack, that's often set up for big UAT and manual testing operations, and even where it's automated, these are done as huge test suites that take an awful long time to run, and because of that, you can't really adopt acceptance of a continuous stream of change into those testing frameworks, etc. So tools, quality center, things like that, people, generally outside of development teams where, for example, senior management haven't adopted, or certain security barriers have been put in place from organizations. That's a significant challenge to things happening. Sorry, I just spotted a question, but it's not a problem. Not an interesting one right for the moment. Taking tooling and people and process really is where we need to look to get a decent transformation and decent delivery stream. Now, Kevin's going to talk about testing and testing tools. I want to talk a little bit about obviously what to transform, which I've gone into a little bit. So process from start to finish. Automate, automate, automate. My mantra mainly in this area is if it's not automated, if someone has to do it manually, it's intervention and into the flow of things, and it's probably a blocker. So your testing needs to be automated, your delivery stream needs to be automated, and things that people repeat over and over again, tests, deploying software, etc. To not automate that, for me, is pretty much a crime. People should spend their time on the bigger things, the bigger picture. Sure, Kevin will go into testing. The difference in testers within a fully agile transform company is quite significant. The other thing you need full end-to-end integration of the tool stack you're using. So here we've got the common disciplines within software development. So management of the overall change program, control of what's happening, what changes being made, design elements, development of the software coding itself, version control, testing, and release. Unless all of the processes and the tools sitting within that environment join up and link up together, you're facing major barriers about finding out what's going on. You may have a change, but if you don't know where it is in the delivery cycle, if you don't know where it is in the release cycle, you've got a lot of barriers to understanding how your situation works. And that's one area where ClearVision significantly look to help, both with services and tooling around something we call Spectrum, which is very much around excuse me, end-to-end process integration, end-to-end tooling, a tool stack which builds a framework that you can use to drive change across the organization. So best practices, etc. Because as I already alluded to, one of the main impacts in agile transformation has to do with the organization and the culture. You need to have top-down adoption and organizational-wide adoption. And yes, process training and transformation. Sorry, another slide slightly out of step here. That should be before the previous one. Looks okay on the dry run. Anyway, sorry. So summary of what I was saying before anyway. So what else to transform? Well, tooling is a significant issue for agile transformation as well. If your tooling doesn't integrate, if it doesn't offer full visibility and traceability and granularity, the ability to drill down into change and see what's happening, to manage it, to monitor it, to report across it, and overall be able to see what's happening, then you're going to find extreme barriers to your agile methodologies long term. So one of the things for tooling is use those that fit the philosophy, fit the agile framework. And as I was saying earlier, big testing frameworks are a significant barrier to that. There are other ones around how you do release, and that's one of the things DevOps is trying to address, is how you take what developers love, which is change, and so do users, to be honest. And then how do you mitigate that into operations? And operations are very much about keeping the pond still, no ripples, no change, because any change is risky. So DevOps is around how you bring those two communities together, and you adopt another mindset around and philosophy around how we do change and push it through into production, and minimize ripples but maximize change. So that's all around continuous deployment. How do you get a piece of code or an idea that someone has for a new feature or a change to a feature? You get it quickly through into development, specified into a sprint, tested during the sprint, tested outside after the sprint's delivered, automatically then pushed into a release stack and out to your community. So how you do that depends on the tools you've obviously got in place. And again, this is an area where we try and help organizations with a tool stack that's explicitly designed to help with that. Let's just talk a little bit about that. So Spectrum, to introduce that, is an end-to-end integrated stack of toolings from requirements all the way through to delivery and deployment. And it's a framework of best practice processes, administration tools to help your system administrators work with the tooling, so manage processes within the organization and help drive standards, excuse me, that can then mean you've got cross-team standard reporting, so it's more easy to divulge and discover where bottlenecks are happening, where things are going well, and obviously where things are going well to help roll that particular process or that particular way of working out across an organization, and where things aren't going well to dive in and find out why and affect change. And also within large enterprises and large organizations, one of the challenges is self-service. So we talk a lot about the tool stack, but how and having system administrators manage that tool stack within a large organization. But if excuse me, if a system administrator, for example, when a new project is set up, has to go into 5 different systems and set up projects for that team, set up spaces within Confluence, for example, projects in Jira, projects in Bitbucket, Stash, maybe Bamboo, maybe Jenkins, a lot of different tools that could be plugged and played in there. That's an overhead on your system administrators that isn't great. So Project Wizard is an art of giving self-service to the end user, to project managers, to development heads, team leads, etc., to spin up a new project across the tool stack very, very easily. So that's available behind a firewall, cloud-based, or a hybrid solution. And we are talking to organizations about helping them put the tooling in place, the framework tooling, to help them affect change. So you can adopt Jira, for example, which is commonly happening across the world. But what other tools, and how do you integrate those other tools, including your test suite, such as QA Symphony solutions, your release process, your stacks, such as artifact stacks, such as Artifactory, Nexus? How do you bring them all together as one tool? Okay. Sorry, there was a question popped up. Just wanted to see if it was relevant before continuing, but we're okay at this point. I think that will come up later. So, key barrier for me to true Agile is the tools and process block change, and people also blocking that change. So, delivery, as I was alluding to, operational barriers, these go away if you start to put in DevOps. Sorry, slide's gone slightly funny. It's about people and culture, etc. Again, such as Agile is as well. But testing, most tools and methods are not agile. So I was alluding to HP Quality Center earlier. That is a classic example. You've got others. Sorry, names escapes me in the moment. Sorry, but what we want to do right now is kick off a poll briefly. But also then to allow Kevin to dive a bit deeper into testing tools and methods and philosophy that really helps your agile transformation.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrew. That was a fantastic overview of the overall challenges in adopting Agile, and obviously at QA Symphony we're really interested in testing in general and how that fits in the Agile development ecosystem. So as Andrew mentioned, we do want to ask the audience right now a quick question. So you should have seen a poll come up, and this poll is going to ask you guys, at what point did software testing become part of your Agile transformation? So we've seen for a lot of companies that that's something they think about very early on, and some of you might not have even thought that there's something to change about testing in Agile yet. So please take a second here and fill out this poll. All right, and we'll take a look at the results here. So wow, this is more than I would expect. It looks like almost half of people really thought about testing at the very start of the transformation, and that is ultimately what we would want to see, but we've seen that many people think about it as an afterthought, and like Andrew mentioned, there's a lot of companies that struggle today to bring their testing into more agile methodology and have it match up with what they're doing on the planning as well as the development and coding side. So today we really want to educate you on why, if you're one of those folks that's still in the midst of a transformation, or if you're about to kick off a transformation, why you should really think about how to transform your testing moving into that transformation to make it as successful as possible. So here we're talking on this slide about, in general, how testing really can become a bottleneck in your transformation. So assuming that you change everything else, and like Andrew mentioned, you start doing a lot of your design and planning using maybe something like Confluence, doing more agile gathering of stories, more agile planning of your sprints in maybe 2 or 3 week cycles where you're just constantly delivering features. And you're also looking at doing agile development using things like Stash, Bitbucket, it's called now, in GitHub, things like that. And you're really moving quickly, and you're pushing a lot of features out to be tested, but you still have this very waterfall testing process, which is very slow to react. It's very rigid in the way that it works, very manual in terms of the process and how that's driven, as well as the tools that you're using. And so what you end up with is that you have all these features that are coming out of this great development pipeline that then hit this bottleneck when it comes to testing and validating these features before ultimately they can be deployed. And you might even have put in place some agile deployment practices. So you've got maybe some DevOps type of continuous integration, continuous deployment going on. But all that's great, but you see here that when ultimately you're forced to use a more waterfall testing methodology, that's really going to restrict the amount of those features that can get out. So ultimately, many companies will end up, having features that couldn't be deployed because they didn't have the testing bandwidth to actually be able to validate those features, or they're even worse, kind of left with this, very, very bad decision to make, which is, do we want to deploy this feature even though we haven't tested it, which is ultimately something that you would hope to never do, but sometimes the constraints of the business and wanting to get new features out to customers will push you towards doing something like that, which is obviously a temptation we see all the time. So, what can you really do? Well, instead of not testing certain features at all, given that testing capacity is fixed, and if we don't transform our waterfall testing process, we're not going to get any more speed or any more ability to get more testing coverage out of our current testing process. What you could do is you could reduce the depth of the testing that you have. So that green box there of your testing effort. Obviously, that's going to be fixed if you don't change anything about the people that you have inside your organization or how they're running their testing process or any of the tooling that they're using. So what we could do is we could change that testing box into more of a square. So we would reduce it, and then, sure, we're able to test every feature that's being coded by these developers in this more agile process, but what we lose is depth in testing those features. So we might just have a unit test for that particular feature, but we don't test how it interacts with particular other parts of the system. Or we might also have things happen where, we can test it on a very vanilla setup. For example, we can test it on an iPhone, but we can't get around to testing it on all of the Android devices that typically cause us problems. And so ultimately it's a trade-off that needs to be made, but it's only a trade-off that needs to be made if you don't consider ways in which you can ultimately make that box bigger. And so we're going to talk today about ways you can optimize your manual testing as well as your automated testing so that ultimately that big box becomes even bigger and doesn't become a bottleneck for your process any longer. So just to really talk about how things have changed and what this is going to allow us to do from an agile testing perspective. Waterfall was really a process that was built around certain constraints that we had in our current environment. So we had very, very slow environment creation. So we would see inside of organizations that it could typically take, weeks, if not months, to get a testing environment set up. So what that meant was that our testing process would have to be planned very far in advance, and that we'd have to have a lot of, process inside of that handoff, approvals and things like that to get going. And that's obviously not the case today, and we'll talk about what's changed there. From a code merging perspective, we were using things like code trunks and Subversion, et cetera, where it would be a very much so, infrequent period where you'd be able to put code in and merge it. And so we typically wait till the end of the week or maybe the end of the month to merge code together, and then we end up a lot of times the code that we merged was no good, and we'd have to undo that week or month of work that we've done, making assumptions that all of that code would work together. In the past, we had a lot of on-premise software, and so when doing on-premise software, obviously, there's a lot more testing that needs to be done about all of the different variables that could be occurring in a particular on-premise environment. That's obviously changed as we move to the cloud. A lot of desktop software, and so when you look at desktop software and things like Microsoft Word, for example, those traditionally were released maybe once a year or not even once a year. You look at Windows that might have been released every 3 years or so, and so focus on that sort of desktop package software played into a cadence of these very infrequent and long periods of development and testing that were going on in silos. Very little collaboration previously, so we saw that typically testers lived within a testing team that was separate from a requirements team or a business analyst team, and there wasn't really much interaction going on inside of organizations. They're very much so structured in silos in that way. And then finally, a lot of offshore development, and so we saw that that was very popular as the costs would rise in the U.S. and in the U.K. and places like that to do software development. That costs were initially much lower offshore in places like India and others, and so there's a lot of adoption of offshore development, and in doing that, we needed a lot of structure around our process, and we needed a lot of advanced planning, and it made sense to work in these longer iterations and cycles, but obviously that has changed today. And so these are a lot here of the changes that have happened in terms of shifting the environment around us and allowing us to be more agile in how we do our development and ultimately our testing. So, containers have really changed the way that we work, and they've simplified the process of setting up testing environments, so that can be done in a day or two, which allows us to test in much shorter iterations with much less advanced notice. We have Git and things like GitHub as well as Bitbucket, which have replaced Subversion and allowed for almost continuous merging of code, and that allows us to check in our code more quickly, allows us to see how that code plays with all the rest of the code base and more easily merge that code and send it out into production, assuming we've adopted something like continuous deployment. There's much less adoption of on-premise software. A lot of software is moving into the cloud, and the cloud allows us, obviously, to push releases very frequently, and so it rewards us if we work in a more agile way and we can test new features more quickly. Then we can get them out into the cloud almost instantaneously and have customers see new features without even knowing that they've been pushed. There's a very much so a focus now on things like mobile, the Internet of Things, the web technologies, and shifting away from desktop prepackaged software. And so obviously these mobile communities demand new features regularly, and they want to see updates yesterday. And so in these types of environments, you really need to be able to push software quickly and not only develop it quickly, but also know that it's going to be quality software that you push. For example, in the App Store, we know that people can be ruthless, and one bug can be the demise of any particular app. So obviously quality, but also quick testing are both important. There's a lot more collaboration. Andrew talked about things like Confluence, HipChat, et cetera, that have allowed us to increase teamwork and collaboration. We've also seen a shift towards things like Scrum, where testers, instead of being in a dedicated testing team, will be inside of more of a Scrum team around a product or a particular microservice or module. And so that has really increased collaboration and allowed us to work much more quickly and change our plans around our development in real time. And then finally, you look at the offshore components. There has been a shift much more towards bringing development back onshore. Obviously, still offshore development is huge, but the prices there have started to rise to become more comparable to what you'll find onshore in the U.S. or U.K., other regions. And so there's more of a shift towards bringing people in-house, and it's much easier to adopt things like Agile when the majority of your development team is located in the same geographical location. And so, it's always great to have two opinions on webinars like this. And, I would say that definitely we're a fan of process automation as far as it comes to release management, as far as it comes to, creating, different requirements and having the approval process be automated, having test case approvals be automated. But just like, how requirements, need some human interaction, we still do believe that tests do need some human element as well. And so you can always automate unit tests and integration tests to really check what's going on, but there is really a human element that needs to be introduced into any test that you're writing to make sure that it's a good test that really validates what you're trying to accomplish and what your user wants to do in your software. And beyond that, there are going to be other times as well where manual tests just make more sense from an ROI perspective than investing a lot of effort up front in automation. And so that could be, for example, if you're implementing packaged software and you're only going to test something one time at the point that you implement it, you're really not going to get much of a payback from automating that particular scenario, and you might still be working in an agile process and doing agile testing, but it might be more of a manual test, and we'll talk about how manual testing has changed in Agile. Additionally, you might have to test difficult parts of an application that might be very complex to try to automate. So you might not want to, introduce a lot of effort in trying to automate something that is very difficult to code around if you can very quickly test it manually, and you would never run that test frequently enough to really get a payback on automating that. And then finally, there are parts of the system that are always in flux. I think about, for example, the Salesforce login page. There's a new advertisement or banner on that every day, and it's constantly changing. And so that might be something where the maintenance of having to constantly update that test might be unnecessary, and that might be something where you have some manual testing components introduced there as well. So these are some scenarios where ultimately we believe that there's still a place for manual testers inside of Agile testing, but their ultimate role is going to be a little bit different than what it was in more of a waterfall context. And so this is what we're talking about here, a great study that I reference very often, but I always love to talk about really the hard facts and the data that supports these claims that we make. And so in terms of it, in a more waterfall setting, we have a lot of manual scripted tests where there's very defined steps inside of that test, And ultimately, we spend a lot of time in trying to really write out those test cases. And so what this study found is that if we took more of an exploratory approach and we didn't write out all of those steps in so much detail, what we would get as a benefit would be that we'd be about 7 times faster in doing more of an exploratory approach. And that's because we're not spending as much time really writing out in detail what those test cases are meant to do, and instead we're trusting that the user, who's a tester, is an expert in how to use the system, and that we don't need them to define line by line how to set up a user, for example, in the system. And people would say, well, if I give up these steps, what's going to happen? I mean, am I going to not find the defects that I need to, and I'm going to introduce risk now into my system in that bugs might make it through and leak into production when I go live? And in what we've found in this study, you're going to see that you actually test better. So that's not going to happen. You're going to test faster. You're also going to find just as many bugs as you would find doing more of that scripted approach. And I think that that is really ultimately what we're all looking for, is to test faster and find just as many, if not more, defects. And we're also going to reduce the amount of work for developers. We're going to cause less false defect reports because you're staying engaged with how the application actually works, and you're only logging defects when you feel that the application doesn't do what it's supposed to, whereas a test script might lead a tester to believe a defect is there when it's really not, because the test case wasn't worded clearly or it's outdated in comparison to the requirements. So we find that in doing this, in shifting to more of an agile approach, you can test faster, test better, and also be smarter about your testing and more efficient, not bog down your developers with false defect reports. So what this looks like in a quick overview here is moving from the waterfall way on the left, where we have these long planning cycles where we have huge test plans in Word, and then we design out hundreds or thousands of test cases to cover our new system release for the quarter, for the year, and then we go through these long, antiquated test cycles where we have unit testing, integration testing, then system testing, then UAT, and ultimately pushing this out into production. And we're only taking reports on testing activity, on a weekly or maybe a monthly basis. And the more iterative way of this exploratory testing is that we would come in with a very loosely defined scenario. We would go in and plan what we want to test. We would design really the detail of how we're going to test that on the fly. So as we get to a page and we know that the ultimate goal is to create a user, we might think about different ways that we could break the system and how it might, for example, act if we impersonated a user in Europe rather than one in the US. And then we execute just that small testing idea, and then we take some feedback on that and go ahead and plan a additional action on top of that. So it's very iterative and agile in the way it works. There's very little lead time to get up and get testing, which is great, so that when a developer pushes us a feature, we can go in and validate it almost instantaneously. And then we're constantly reporting out of these 1 hour or 1.5 hour exploratory testing sessions that we do on what we found when we were in the application. But ultimately, I would agree that automation is really central to Agile, especially if people are looking at continuous deployment. For example, if we're having code check-ins and we want to push code live, every hour or every day or every week, the burden of having 100% manual testing, especially when it comes to regression testing, is huge. I mean, that's going to be a variable amount of time that it takes to complete that regression cycle. It's hard to predict. Testers might be tied up in something else, and that might reduce your ability to push features when you want to go live. So test automation really is something that we do believe is central, especially from a regression perspective, and is a good complement to the exploratory manual testing that you'd be doing. But the more waterfall way of doing automation really is broken. And so if you look at tools like Quick Test Professional or UFT from HP and other more commercial UI solutions, they have these common problems. So the speed of running a test is very slow. So you might find that running these tests in an automated fashion takes almost as much time as running them manually, because they have to interact with pages and wait for pages to load, and they have to try to traverse the DOM structure to find a certain element to do a test. And so that can be ultimately very slow and kind of defeat the purpose of automation. Also, they're not very reliable, so they're looking for a certain UI element that might have been moved, might have been renamed, might not look the same, and so the test might fail and give you a sort of false positive on that failure, and then the developer needs to go investigate that feature only to find, well, it's not really the code that's changed, it's really the test that's not intelligent enough to figure out what we're doing with the application, so they're not very reliable tests. Ton of maintenance required in these tests, so if they're breaking all the time, you're constantly updating them when any UI elements change or when workflows change and things like that, and so the maintenance cost is very high. And so the whole idea around automation is that you really invest a lot up front in building an automated test, but then it shouldn't take you much effort going forward to maintain that. But that's really not what you'll find with these more UI-based commercial automation solutions. And then finally, the cost of these tools is huge. I mean, you look at something like QTP or UFT, that's almost $10,000 for a perpetual license. So as we become agile and we want more of our testers and even BAs to contribute to automation, how do we do that? How do we collaborate on these automated tests we're creating if the cost of the solution is so high that we can't have everyone in and interacting with it? And so obviously the shift that we see is towards more open source technology, more updated technology, and really shifting the effort from just solely being around UI testing to more in the integration level and the unit level of your application. So this is a cross-functional effort. I mean, unit tests are typically written by developers, but testers might be helping them to define what those unit tests need to do and making sure they're good unit tests that have robust coverage. And we look at tools like Cucumber as well as being very unique in that they allow you to test at the integration level, so you can do more end-to-end testing without having to interact with the UI and introduce all those problems around reliability we mentioned earlier. And then obviously still you'll need some UI tests in your automation portfolio, and things like Selenium are becoming very popular, and those are great because they can be run by anyone. It's a free open source technology, so you can really scale it across your team. And in doing that, it'll allow for much more collaboration, and people can contribute Selenium using more easy-to-use programming languages like Ruby and Python that are easy for someone who used to be a manual tester to pick up and then start contributing to UI automation. And there's also Selenium IDE, which allows for record and playback, which obviously isn't the most robust way of writing an automated test, but it's a good one. And you'll see on top of there that this all kind of ties back together. You see that there's a little cloud at the top talking about the session-based, more manual or exploratory testing, and that's where our tool, QTest Explorer, would come in and kind of complement that on the top. And what it will do is that's still manual testing, but our tool will actually automate the documentation of that. So as much of the time as possible that you're doing in that sliver of more session-based testing can be performed very quickly, very efficiently, and then can be rolled up in our platform with the results of things like JUnit and Cucumber and Selenium that we integrate to as well. So overall, that sort of wraps up the testing specific look-in for the presentation, and we've intentionally left 10 minutes here at the end to get to some questions. So right now you can use the Q&A section of the panel to send in some questions, and I'll hand it back over to Jeff here to look through this list and see which questions we want to cover here with Andrew.
Great. Thanks, guys. Why don't we start it off kind of talking about an area where there seems to be maybe some disagreement between you and Andrew. Andrew, you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So Andrew, you talked about automate everything. Kevin, you talked about automating everything is a myth. So Andrew, what did you think about Kevin's take on automation as it relates to testing?
No, I think it can sound like there's a dichotomy in the message there. Where I'm driving from is where you have things that are repeatable, but you've got someone doing it as a human activity, then that is something that really should be automated. And I'm probably talking more about deployment, build automation, the test automation that you do want to run, that the stuff that can be tested, the point testing, etc. Automate that. But as Kevin is saying, there are elements of testing where humans have a better idea of what to do and how to explore. What I used to call monkey testing many years ago is, can we break this thing that we think we built, etc. I think that's very sensible.
Yeah, and I think we look at a rule of thumb typically as, it's kind of a 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 payback usually on automation, depending on how good your automation team is. So, if you're only going to run something 3 or 4 times or less, that wouldn't make sense to automate that. But once you go beyond that, typically it's going to make sense to automate that if you can maintain it properly. So I think automated regression testing is definitely key, but at some points it can almost slow you down because it's something where you might have a feature that's ready to go out the door and it just needs to quickly be validated, but then you're waiting on an overworked automation team to write an automation script because you have this mantra that nothing can be released until there's an automated test of certain caliber written against it. So we can certainly see that overall philosophy of automating tests, in my opinion, would be something that you want to do when you reuse those tests a lot. But like any philosophy, when it becomes too dogmatic and it gets in the way of just doing what makes sense to get working software out to customers as quickly as you can, then it's something that I think any good team would question it where they should.
Great.
Yeah, and also
we had a couple
what
questions.
you didn't say was automate the right things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So we had a couple questions that came in around, when you're going through an agile transformation, which projects do you start with, and which ones maybe do you not try to make part of the agile process? Andrew, I'll start with you. Do you have any guidance on, what kind of projects should you start taking on within your agile process, and maybe which ones should you maybe push off until you're more mature with agile?
That's going to differ, I believe, for every single organization. But a general guideline tends to be around what is the deliverable, what's the outcome from that project. So, for example, if you're talking a large financial organization, then go agile with maybe things that directly affect the trading floor. That's a rapidly changing environment, and leave behind things that are more, change less frequently. So maybe large internal systems around actual financial accounting and things like that. They tend to change rapidly. So it will be targeted more towards the end user and what's being delivered. But essentially, you can agile everything and not just software development. A lot of marketing teams, for example, have gone agile. Events, etc., are driven through agile processes.
Yeah, I would say I definitely would agree there in terms of project selection. Just things to stay away from or that would become risky are projects where people aren't located in the same place, so that makes it a lot more difficult to kind of change your process as you go and ultimately get good buy-in and understand how much people are on board with that particular agile transformation that's going on. And I would also say it's sometimes nice to start with a project where you're starting fresh. So for a lot of companies,
Yes.
especially like a bank, for example, they might have a lot of legacy mainframe applications that might have no automated test coverage and no automated release infrastructure. So it makes it very difficult to see the benefits of an agile transformation. But for a new team where they can build new tooling off the ground and automate from day one and put in that sort of DevOps pipeline, they might be able to realize a lot more benefit up front, and they're more nimble, and instead of kind of trying to turn around a battleship as more of a dinghy, and that might provide some more quick benefits that then get more buy-in across the organization and help to get more of a runway to do more of the agile transformation on the larger teams.
Got it. Great. We had a couple questions that came in about some of the staffing and personnel changes you make when you go through agile transformation, and people saying that now the developers are doing more testing, or they've downsized the development team and expected more of the business analysts or the project managers to do testing. What are some of the best practices when it comes to staffing within Agile teams as you're going through these transformations? And do you see more companies eliminating testers, adding testers? What's the role of the software tester within the Agile team?
Yeah, so I can go first on that. I think first of all, in terms of Agile, it's always great to have people in general who are good communicators, very flexible, and open to change, and not really rigid or closed-minded in that way, and then also just continuous learners. In my opinion, I would rather hire a tester who was previously a manual tester, but really eager to, learn about automation, contribute to an Agile team, and continue to learn and improve their skill set than someone who might be, an automation whiz, but they don't know how to communicate and contribute with a team, and they're very, much so going to be a blocker with any change or any initiatives that we try to push through. So I think, ultimately hiring for Agile really comes a lot around kind of culture fit. I think first, and then skills are obviously important, but, the tool set's always changing. I mean, it was Selenium now, or it is Selenium now, it was QTP. It's becoming things like, Protractor and other automation tools. So there's always going to be a change in the tools, but, having good people that can respond to that change and work on a team is going to be something that's pretty constant.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to say very much aligned with that as well. It's culture and people able to continuously change. The biggest barrier we see is people that say, well, it's working now, it doesn't need fixing, whatever that might be that they're working against. Agile is about change. It's not about saying, right, we've got an Agile process, we're using 2-week sprints, we're doing it this way, XXX. No. That could be a starting point, but, it's constant improvement, continuous improvement, always looking for change. So therefore, hiring is very much around that mindset, that philosophy as well.
Great. And the last question we'll answer today, and I want to remind people we're going to do a quick survey after this question, so if you don't mind just sticking around for the survey and taking that for us, that would be great. But the last question is around coverage, and as teams are moving Agile, they're finding that they have less coverage over the applications that they're testing. What are some ways that teams are able to deal with this? What are ways that which are some best practices as far as prioritizing what to test, when to test? So there's a comfort level around the risk of the applications that you're pushing to production.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think a lot of it is understanding how your users use the application. So the closer you are to understanding how the user is actually going to go in and interact with the application, it might limit the number of scenarios you really need to focus on. It's often enlightening. People think, well, the application gets used this way, and then once they actually become closer to their customer as part of this Agile transformation, they realize that customers are using it entirely differently. And as long as you understand what parts of the application your customer uses and focus the testing there and prioritize it that way, that's the best way to drive the coverage that you need to keep your customers and ultimately be successful.
Great. Andrew, any thoughts on that?
Nothing really to add on that. I think Kevin covered that really well, actually.
Great. Well, guys, Kevin, Andrew, thank you guys so much for your time today. For our audience, thank you for staying with us and listening. This webinar will be available on demand, so feel free to share it with friends or colleagues. And we'll see you next time. Please stick around, though, and we'll pop up the survey right now. Thank you.